Recording. Cool. All right, y'all. We are finally at day 4 of the PyHC Spring 2025 meeting. And I know I use spring slightly lightly as it's June, but technically, what is it, until the 20th or 21st? It's spring, so it counts. It counts. Anywho, so today we're gonna first start off with some talks about DOI minting, and I think Jim, you might have some to talk about with your experience trying to do a Zenodo GitHub integration. Yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
So are you ready for me?
yeah. Yeah. After that, we'll do some FEP talks, PyC user survey revisit, and wrap up. I don't have slides for the wrap up, just like the intro this time. Figured we could just verbally talk through. So Jim, take it away.
Get all the Zoom stuff out of the way here. All right, so I hope you all see my title slide.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about experiences I've had trying to get the GitHub Zenodo integration up for publishing, like for minting DOIs and publishing your releases on Zenodo and tying that to your GitHub release process. And so I'll start with just a little bit of background information. People probably already are sort of aware of this, but we want to strive to maintain up-to-date DOI identifiers and metadata records for software releases. And that's a great way to ensure that people can cite your software if they publish a paper about it or using it, and make your software more discoverable. And then all your contributors can be properly credited. And so Zenodo is one popular choice for minting DOIs and hosting the archives of your software releases. And of course, most of us are familiar with GitHub as a source management platform. And so there's this integration between Zenodo and GitHub that once you set it up, when you publish a release on GitHub, it automatically connects to Zenodo and mints a DOI for you and updates your release assets and populates some of the metadata in the Zenodo record and publishes it. So, so sort of what I'm looking at is how can we leverage these tools to make that DOI minting and management process as easy as possible, and really incorporate that into our release workflows. So just a little bit of behind the scenes concepts. So when you deposit a piece of software in Zenodo, the idea is that it's going to be a series of releases, not just a one-time archival. And so that actually triggers the creation of 2 DOIs on that initial release. So one of them is going to be a concept DOI, and that's intended to refer to the software as a whole, the entire series of releases. And on Zenodo, they, every time you make a release after that, they update it so that if you follow the concept DOI, it points you at the most recent release. But you get a versioned DOI, and that changes for each subsequent release that you upload. And so they're all sort of tied together by having the same concept DOI. And then after the first time you deposit a release, the subsequent releases, you only get a new versioned DOI, and the concept DOI stays the same. And then Zenodo keeps track of the data part of that deposit, which is the artifacts that that are your release software. Typically, that's just going to be a zip file or a tarball. And important thing to note is that once you publish the Zenodo record, the data within it is immutable. Now, you can still edit the metadata, like if you left a contributor out or you want to add some search keywords or other URLs. That stuff can all be edited after publication, but the data cannot be changed or deleted or replaced or anything like that once you publish. So this is a screenshot of the Zenodo site. This is actually our IDL speedas software, which so that was sort of the first step of the process was getting that in there before I went to work on PySpeedas and the full GitHub integration. So this was probably the first release I'm looking at. Yeah. And so it does tell you that there's a newer version of that record available because we have many releases after that that have been uploaded. You can see you have a contributor list. You can expand this and show the affiliations of everybody. And then these green dots show that these people have org IDs that are associated with the record. And then if you were to scroll down, you would see some more metadata. The license information is on there. I think maybe that was the previous. Let's see. It's in there somewhere, I promise. And then you see other links to related works, different DOIs. So in this case, we have a journal article associated that was sort of the publication that sort of went along with this series of releases. And we've credited our funding sources here in the metadata. And then we have some data about the software itself. So we have the download page for IDL speedas, and it's IDL software, and development status is active. So that's what you get in a Zenodo record. And then you can see that this has been indexed by some external resources like Software Heritage, OpenAir. And then we have a bunch of keywords here that help for searching. So Zenodo records can be in one of two states. When you create a new record, it's created as a draft. So in that state, it's still fully editable. You could remove the assets or replace them, the data, the zip file or whatever that you're managing. And when it's a draft, it's only visible to the owner of that record. And then when you start a draft release, the versioned DOI gets assigned when you create the draft. And then once the record is published, then that versioned DOI goes live. And assuming that the owner has designated this as an open record, it's visible to the public and it'll show up in searches and so forth. So yeah, so there's this integration between GitHub and Zenodo. And the idea is once you set this up, when you publish a new release on GitHub, and behind the scenes, I think it's using GitHub's webhooks capability. That publication event triggers the creation of a release on Zenodo and minting of a DOI and uploading the release assets and so forth. So to set that up, you need to log into Zenodo, and you could do it just using a GitHub account, and it'll sort of authenticate through GitHub. And one thing to be aware of there is, this process, this series of releases might, hopefully it'll extend for a good long time. And you have to think about what's going to happen if you were to, say, retire or change jobs or something. You don't want to orphan that series of release by like connecting it to your personal GitHub account and then disappearing. Um, it might it might work out for a while if the rest of your team still has that API key you generated in Zenodo, but if you ever have to change that, that needs to be done through the original GitHub account. So highly recommended to use a role account for that rather than a personal account, and then make sure that your handoff procedure, if someone else takes over the development responsibilities for your project, make sure that GitHub account and gets handed over so that in the future you can continue that series of releases. What you don't want to happen is to start a brand new series under a different user ID, and then that sort of breaks the chain of releases. You would have to start with a new concept DOI, and then they'd be sort of separate entities. So something to be aware of. Um, so, from your role account, you've logged into Zenodo. You can generate an API token on the Zenodo side. And then going back to your GitHub repository or organization settings, there's a way to turn on the GitHub integration or the Zenodo integration and enter that API key. And that's what authenticates that repository when new releases are being made. And then once that's enabled, if you publish your release on GitHub, then it automatically uploads the zip file for the software, mints a DOI, and publishes that record on Zenodo. And be aware that that is a GitHub release, something you do on the GitHub site. That's completely separate from publishing your package to Conda or PyPy or anything like that. So this is strictly connected to the GitHub release process. So what this buys for you, it automates the uploading of the assets. So when you create a new release on GitHub, it creates that zip file. Or I think maybe both a zip file and a tarball, and so that gets uploaded as the data part of that Zenodo record. It takes some text from the GitHub release notes and puts that in the metadata, including like a changelog URL, the things you would see if you were to go to that release page on GitHub. It does a pretty decent job of identifying the contributors. And I think this is using the some GitHub API to look at the commit history and look at all the GitHub accounts that contributed to that repository, and if they've provided their real names, it manages to find them. I do not think it does anything with org IDs. I think it does. I think it is able to figure out people's affiliations if they've set that up in their GitHub profiles, but does it do anything? Like there's no connection to the ROR, like research organization record, I think it's called, which is like an org ID for organizations. So if you were to create that record on Zenodo by hand, you get prompted to enter those RORs. It's like sort of a nice consistent ID, identifier just to avoid having a lot of different spellings like University of California, Berkeley versus UC Berkeley versus SSL versus Space Sciences Lab. You put in the canonical ROR URL, and that identifies the organization. And then finally, it automatically mints the DOI when you publish your GitHub release. So that's great. They've given us this nice integration. So mission accomplished. We're all done. But why are there more slides? Turns out there are some pitfalls. So this integration may actually not work on your project depending on what your needs are. So as I mentioned, I don't think it resolves RORs or ORC IDs. Um, Now there are ways to help it out. You can there's a configuration file, .zenodo.json, and in that you can put JSON with if you name the fields right, you could put your contributor information in there and then add affiliation, the RORs or ORC IDs. And then you can also do it via a citation.cff file. Um, but the trouble is you can't combine these sources of information. So if you make a zenodo.json file, it just pulls information out of there. It doesn't go looking through the commit history to pick up any additional authors that were not mentioned in the zenodo.json. So that has to be actively maintained if you want to continue crediting uh, other people who have contributed to your repo. And also on the Zenodo side of things, you can specify creators and contributors. Um, so when I set up the IDL speed-s records, I took the creators to mean like the core contributors that were there from the beginning and our PI, and then everybody else who's just made a commit here and there, they would go in as contributors. And I think it doesn't do anything. There's no way to specify search keywords to put in the Zenodo record. So if you use the GitHub Zenodo integration, um, you're probably still going to have a little bit of work to do on the Zenodo side of things, but you can edit that metadata after the record is published. So might not be a deal breaker. But you also have to think about how you're going to use the versioned DOIs that you're creating. So those are specific to that release of your software. So if your package has like an about page or a version option, or that is a place where you would naturally want to put your versioned DOI. So that might be embedded in your source code somewhere. You probably want that versioned DOI in your PyProject.toml so that it can get included in your project metadata, so it would show up on your PyPy landing page. And possibly there are other places in your release assets where that versioned DOI might want to appear. But the problem is that DOI doesn't get generated until you publish the release on GitHub. And then by that time, your release files have already been uploaded. The record is now published. You cannot change your release files. So that does not work. Yeah, sorry to be the bearer of bullshit, but that seems to be like a big problem. So what now? If you really want to embed those version DOIs in your release files. So as I mentioned, Zenodo has draft releases. So one of the things I looked at, is there a way to get the GitHub integration to create a draft instead of a published release? And the answer is no. In fact, I couldn't find any user configurable properties at all other than the API key. You just get what you get. And then another thing I tried really hard to do was, okay, maybe we create the draft release outside of this process, maybe using the Zenodo web interface or the API. Grab the DOI for that, merge it into your release files, and then maybe you could just let the Zenodo integration do the final publishing when you're ready. That also does not work. If there's a draft Zenodo release out when you hit publish on GitHub, it just fails. It really wants to create its own fresh, brand new release. And if there's already a draft, Zenodo only lets you have one draft release at a time, and it just fails. So as far as I could tell, there's no way to make a draft, do some stuff, embed your DOI, and then use the Zenodo integration to finish the publication. And that's kind of a bummer. Um, so what does that mean? Are we stuck just, if you need that capability of embedding the version DOIs, do we just have to do everything by hand like peasants? Uh, Maybe not. Um, Zenodo does have an API which is accessible, and that's probably how the integration is implemented. You can call that Zenodo API from a GitHub action. Uh, so that's an approach I started looking into. You can script the creation of your draft release, and then attach that to any event that could trigger a GitHub action. And then, so what we're talking about here is basically re-implementing the GitHub Zenodo integration from scratch, but trying to do a better job and make it a little more flexible than the one that's in place now. And the key concept is to separate the creation of the draft, which mints the DOI, and then give yourself some room in between that and the final publication, to merge your DOI into the release files, and then finalize the release. So I'm gonna show you some things I was able to do. This is not a tutorial. It's, you would certainly not want to heist any of this code yet and start using it. This is just in my floundering around. These are some things that I managed to get working, but there's a lot more work needed to make this ready for prime time. So what I do is I cloned the PySpeed repository, and I just called it the Zenodo sandbox. And this is under our SpeedS organization, just like PySpeedS. And it's just a snapshot I took of the PySpeedS repo back in February. And then the .github/workflows/ reserve DOI.yaml is the GitHub workflow where I've been doing all this stuff with the Zenodo API. And so what I could do is mint a new DOI if necessary, and it can detect if a draft has already been created. And then I have some code in there to actually replace that DOI in at least pyproject.toml, and potentially if there are other places where that needs to be merged into your release files, that's where it would go. There is a Zenodo record for this experiment, which is live and has a concept DOI. And one thing which I sort of regret doing is I actually created this as a live record in their production. So it's a real Zenodo record for a fake project. And yeah, at one point when I was experimenting with how I could get people's org IDs in there, I actually started getting notifications from org ID that records have been publications have been attached to my record. And to my horror, I realized that all the other contributors were probably getting those too for my phony baloney project. So they do have like a test server equivalent where I think things don't persist permanently, but and the name was right there in front of me. I think they even call it their sandbox, and I didn't pick up on that. But if you're going to embark on an experiment like this, maybe do it there instead of the live service. So okay, so the steps for using the API to do things. First thing we need to do is create a new draft release. So you make a call to the Zenodo API with an API token, and I've been using the concept DOI as sort of a lookup key. What you need in order to create the draft release through this particular endpoint, the way it works is you specify a record ID, which is like the last live record in the series, the last published record. So you might have to do a lookup or two to find that, and then you use that last DOI or record ID or what have you. Use that most recent live one, and then on that record you call the release creation endpoint, and that's what mints the new DOI, and then you get back some JSON that has the new version DOI embedded in it. So in that step, if it founds that a release already existed uh, and it's already in a draft state, just extract it, extract that DOI, otherwise create a release and grab the DOI out of it. And then we have to sort of keep track of whether uh, we were successful in immediately creating a new draft, or if we just reused an existing draft that was already available to us. So this is what the code looks like, and I don't expect anybody to, follow this line by line. But a lot of this is just debugging and error checking boilerplate. The meat of it is here in this request to the Zenodo API. So there's a deposit endpoint, and so I'm doing a query here. I'm giving the concept DOI. Um, I'm specifying just return one record, sort by most recent, and then specifying my access token, which I've put in as a GitHub secret. Um, and then we get back a JSON response. And then there's a very useful tool that's available for scripting in GitHub Actions called JQ. And this is basically like a query language, so you can easily pull things out of a pile of JSON. Uh, so in this case, I'm looking for so I get basically a single element array, since I specified only return one, the most recent result. And then from that returned record, I get the 0th element of it. And then from that record, I pull out the ID, record identifier, the state, whether it's a draft or published, and whether it's been submitted. I think that's just a flag. And I, sort of echo everything. And then I look to see what I got back. And then I set some environment variables, sort of recording the DOI I got, and recording whether it existed or not, or whether what I found is already a draft release or not. And this is what the Zenodo record looks like that you get back. So you definitely want to be using a tool to pull stuff out of this rather than try to parse it by hand. And then in my debug output, you see I did get a record ID. In this case, the latest record I found was actually published. So that means in this workflow, I'm going to have to create a new draft. So I set some environment variables there, and then that gets passed to a later step in the workflow. So if we need to, we can create that new draft release, mint the DOI, grab that, and continue. This step can be skipped if we found that a draft release already existed. So you see in the GitHub action, I do this test here. I test this environment variable to see if I need a new draft. And if it does, then I go ahead and do that here. So again, here is the request. So as I mentioned, you're doing this on the latest record ID that you found from the previous step. And then there's this new version endpoint, and that is the endpoint that creates a draft for you and mints a DOI. And then I keep track of the response to that request. And from that, I can pull out the record ID and construct the new DOI from it, and then record those in environment variables to pass to the next step in the process. Now, when you create a new draft release, it actually clones the data files from the release you cloned it from. So that means you have the code in there um, from the previous release, which you do not want. So there's going to have to be a step where you look to see what files are in that newly created release, and then you want to delete all of them. So you're starting from a fresh, empty copy. Um, I didn't realize that at first, my first few times using the API, and ended up with records that had 2 zip files associated with them, which is not what you want. So here's what that work how that works. Again, here is the endpoint. This files endpoint is what gives you a list of files from the release. So then I keep track of that response. And then again, I step through that JSON and pull out the IDs and then pass it through a little shell loop. And then for each file ID I found, uh, I go ahead and call the delete endpoint. And this is specified outside outside that request URL. There's probably a way to do it by just embedding that delete command somehow in the URL. But this worked. And then just as debugging, I do that query again just to verify that it successfully removed all the pre-existing files. And then you now have the newly minted version DOI in hand, and now we can use it to script the merge into your project files. So in this script, I only have it modifying pyproject.toml for now. Citation.cff usually has URLs embedded in it, but from my point of view, it doesn't make sense to have a version URL there. That, to my thinking, should be a concept DOI, because what you're citing with a citation.cff, you're not citing any specific release of it. You're citing the repository. So I think the concept DOI makes more sense to use there. And if all you're using is the concept DOI, then there's no need to update that every time you generate a new version DOI. You might also want to use that version DOI, have it in your documentation. If you're producing documentation records that are tied to that release, it'd be nice to have that version DOI in there. And if you're using Sphinx to build your documentation for read the docs, I haven't tested this yet, but it supposedly does have the capability to pull a string variable, which could be your version DOI. It could pull things directly out of your pyproject.toml. And that's great because it would be perfect if we could just use pyproject.toml as our single source of truth for what the version URL is, and avoid having to touch all of our or potentially any of our release files to merge that update in. It'd be nice to just have one place where that needs to be changed. And then but if you do need to embed that DOI elsewhere in your project files, this would be the step where you would do that. And that's as far as I got with this. Oh, well, yeah, this is the script that does that. So, so now this is interesting because now you're actually changing things in your repository. So you need to actually commit them. So you set up a Git identity to use within this workflow, so that these commits will come from like a GitHub bot action. And then so so I've got the new DOI in an environment variable here, just the bare DOI, and also the URL string we've created for it. And then the rest of it was just creating some pattern matching variables, and making sure I have escapes in all the right places, uh, which is always a little bit tricky with tools like sed or grep, but I did eventually converge on something that worked. And then this last line replaces the old versioned DOI with the new line that should go in your pyproject.toml. And then after you've modified it, you git add it if necessary, commit it, and this commit will come from the GitHub Actions bot, and then you push that change to the repository, and then you're done at least with the process of creating that draft release. Now, so this is incomplete as it stands now. You would need to update the other metadata. You'd certainly want to, and that would mean probably mean calling a GitHub API to get the list of contributors. And so if we're trying to make a replacement for the Zenodo integration, we probably want to do this more flexibly, like be able to use both the commit history and the Zenodo.json and potentially the citation.cff, and at least have the ability, maybe through a configuration option, to allow all three of those sources for your contributor names and org IDs and affiliations. And then it would be nice if we had a way to somehow distinguish between creators and contributors. So maybe you would have maybe maybe more fields in like whatever equivalent to Zenodo.json we come up with. And then finally, we have to do the actual publication. So again, you can't use the existing integration in this scenario because you already have created a draft release, and that blocks the Zenodo integration from completing it. But when you publish a GitHub release, that can be a trigger for a GitHub action. So you could still have this connected to your GitHub release if you want it that way, by just writing an action that does that final release and then triggering it on the GitHub release publication. Now you might think, oh, well, GitHub lets me create draft releases, and it looks like the keywords are there to trigger a GitHub action from the publication of a draft release. So maybe that'd be a good place to put the initial workflow. So you create a GitHub draft. Hopefully this runs behind the scenes, and then you do whatever else you have to do. And then when you publish the draft, then you call this other action to finish the upload to Zenodo. Unfortunately, even though you might think that would work by looking at the GitHub documentation, if you dig a little deeper, you find out that creating a draft release in GitHub doesn't actually, you can't use that as a trigger on a workflow, which is kind of a bummer. But you can't trigger that workflow manually. You can just have it so you browse to that workflow on GitHub, and then if you set things up right, there's just a button there to run it manually, and you could use that to sort of kick off the creation of this draft release. So that is what I've done so far, and so I hope maybe if any of you are interested in trying this, I hope I've saved you from going down a few potential time-wasting rabbit holes. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? Is this approach worth pursuing? Should I try to go ahead and finish this and make it robust and something that we could recommend to other projects, or is it maybe a little bit too complicated and potentially fragile for us to trust? Maybe it makes more sense to just do things by hand if you need that capability of having your version of DOIs be part of your release files. And if you don't need that, probably the existing integration works just fine for you. So Um, you might not even need all this complexity, but I suspect many of us will want that. And so it'd be nice if we had a better way to do that. Um, I'm interested if people have any thoughts on you know, using PyProject.toml as a single source of truth for the DOIs to avoid the need to update that in multiple places. For example, how might that work at runtime if your uh, Python code wants to display, a version number or an about this package blurb, places where you would want a version DOI. Is there a way at runtime to pull those from pyproject.toml? Um, and then, as I alluded to, sometimes it's more appropriate to use concept DOIs. Other times it's more important to use version DOIs if something's really tied to a specific software release. Um, so, as I mentioned, I think concept DOIs are more appropriate for citation.cff files, but maybe people have other thoughts. And that's all I have. So hopefully that can be the start of some interesting discussion.
Thanks, Jim, for walking us through this whole journey you went through.
Yeah, it was yeah, this presentation turned out being more of a war story than maybe I thought it would be, but it was interesting. I learned a lot by going through the process, that's for sure.
I bet. I bet. Well, I immediately see some hands raised, so I'll just go in order of how I saw them. John.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim, for going down that rabbit hole so we didn't have to. Um, I think to your first question that this seems worth pursuing simply because um, doing this all by hand is kind of rotten and it's pretty hard to keep consistency. So it seems right. Um, and it feels like I wish CERN did this for us, but failing that, having something that somebody in our community has broken open that we can like collaborate on makes a lot of sense. Um, I'm going to throw in my two war stories real quick just to warn people. Um, one is in the chat, and the upshot is if you mess up your citation.cff, you're done. Um, so you really want to have your CI check your citation.cff because if there's no second chance, there's no please try this again. And the other thing is that your concept DOI resolves to specific DOIs in the order that the record was created. It is not based on the date that you assign in the metadata. It is not based on the version number. It is not based on anything you can change. So if you happen to screw up your citation.cff, realize it after the fact and go back to upload an old version to make sure you have a complete record in Zenodo. Congratulations, everybody is now seeing your old version as the latest version. So you kind of have to get everything right. So those are my war stories.
Rebecca.
Hi, I had motivations for requesting this presentation from Jim. So this connects with the presentation I made yesterday. Um, so some of the, let me lower my hand. So there's an effort that's gaining momentum about trying to fix what's broken in this infrastructure. Um, So this presentation from Jem was really enlightening. So thank you for going down that rabbit hole. I certainly did not have the time to, and probably would have screwed it up more than you did, to be honest. But there's a lot of discussion about how many metadata file software developers are having to manage in the repositories, and the number just keeps growing. And I am fighting for you because this is nonsense. Software developers and engineers do that. There should not be 20 metadata files for you to keep track of. This is not sustainable. And people keep coming up with more ideas, right? new metadata files. Anyway, never mind. I won't get going on it. But the idea I proposed to these groups is gaining traction. There's momentum around it now, and it's now been um, there is interest from the Research Software Alliance. So this is the big international group that is alliance between, say, GitHub, Zenodo, Software Heritage, CodeMeta. All of the big names are in there. So I'm hoping this is hope to this group. But there's acknowledged problems with the citation CFF file. There's other acknowledged problems with the Zenodo.json file. So hopefully we can merge this into one particularly useful file, but with software attached to it, which is another effort I'm involved in. But this isn't going to happen overnight. It would, and that's part of, I'm trying to follow the chat too. Okay. So this is part of the experimentation with HSSI, with the metadata that comes out of that. When that is ready, I'm really hoping that that could serve as some of the testing ground for the infrastructure, as in, can that file be used in the integration with Zenodo? Zenodo, are you on board with this? And they're interested. So there will be a transition time. But okay, I have to go to the chat now. I think I've said enough.
Okay, I'm laughing at John's XKCD contribution.
I know, but the
It
idea
talks
is
about
to.
micro USB. It is so old.
The idea here is that we, instead of creating another useless standard, the idea is to attach software to it so that the existing array of metadata files, say the stuff that PyPy wants, what Conda wants, what this wants, what that wants, it farms all of the metadata that you need in your DOI, farms it all from there, and including from GitHub or GitLab, wherever you are, and then pipes it into this one file that Zenodo will take, that Figshare will take, or whatever, wherever you want to go to make your DOI. It provides this, automatically provides this, yeah. Well, I wouldn't phrase it that way to the other groups, but yes, it completely makes sense, Iris. One file to rule them all, or at least to be interoperable with them all. So, yeah, hoping to improve this landscape better. Okay. I'm laughing too much with this group.
Stuart, I'm curious, how do you all handle your DOI practices with SumPy? We can't hear you, although I see you're unmuted. Aha, I hear things now.
There we go. Now it's too many audio devices. We just use the official Zenodo integration and get a DOI minted for every version, and then in our documentation we say, if you're citing this, you should cite the latest one. Here's the list. Because frankly, I don't care enough to even have spent a hundredth of the time Jim has clearly spent thinking about this.
Understandable. Jim fell on the sword for all of us.
So would some sort of script that is collaboratively developed be useful to work on in these kinds of meetings, or have some sort of hackathon here and there? Would that be useful to develop?
To what end? Like, what do you actually want to achieve? Like, are you talking about having like import SumPy under citation give you back the Zenodo citation information for that version? Are you talking about
Oh,
having it in citation.cff? Are you talking about having it in the documentation somewhere? What exactly do you want?
now that you mention it, now I have two ideas. So one thing would be some sort of hopefully uniform way for someone to retrieve the correct citation once the package is installed. Um, But on the other side, have something, some sort of maybe boilerplate or adaptable script, like what Jim was talking about, to make integration with like this automated release structure from GitHub to Zenodo a more pleasant experience.
But why? Because that already exists, right?
Okay.
This is what I'm trying to get at, right? I'm trying to get at actually what are you actually wanting to do, right? What's the objective of Jim doing what Jim did, right? Because if it's basically anything other than the exceptionally inception type thing of having a file with the citation information in the thing that the citation information is about, then you can do it dynamically in some way, right? Like if you do sunpy dot underscore underscore citation underscore underscore when you import sunpy, it will currently give you back information about our paper we want you to cite. That's dynamic Python code. I assume Zenodo has an API. I'm assuming you could retrieve the citation information from Zenodo based on the current version of SumPy that's installed in there without having to hard code that DOI in the thing you just installed, right? If it's the same goes for the documentation, you could presumably hit the Zenodo API to get the DOI back in the documentation in JavaScript if you wanted to do that, right? So there's probably better ways to solve this than rewrite the whole Zenodo GitHub integration, depending on exactly what you want to do.
Yeah, people aren't necessarily connected to the internet when they're using a tool like PySpeed. As you could be on a plane working on stored data or working on a paper. And if you want to pull a citation, it would be better not to have to hit an API to do that.
Sure, it would be better, but also you've spent how many developer hours on this already when you could have done something better?
One thing that, so let's take the example where there's a less established software package and someone's trying to cite it. Maybe they can't find that GitHub anymore because it's been a couple months and they can't find it. So that provides some motivation of just maybe not having like a separate package, but just an agreed upon, hey, here's where you put that function to retrieve the citation from. So that it's not a dot reference in one package. It's not the example you gave in another package. It's some simple but standard way. Here's the thing you type in here, package name dot underscore underscore, right? To get the citation information. So some sort of best practice there. That's on the citation side. And that also provides some interoperability for packages that aren't on GitHub.
Sure, but again, no matter what you call it, if you have some way of dynamically getting the citation, you can have it pull the current version off the Zenodo API or return the generic one.
Yeah,
Like,
the problem is that doesn't, I want that idea. I want that dynamic way to retrieve that to be in the packages. The only problem that seems to be is that it's what it's called in each package is different. So if there's just
yeah, but
pick a name and
you're never
then
gonna fix that. I mean, you can make it better, but you're never gonna fix it because that's not how people work. So
it can be a best practice though. That's what I'm pointing at here. Like if the group picks
Sure.
something on what it's called, then that can propagate hopefully to a larger community. It's a pick a name and let's go with it kind of idea.
Nick, do you have thoughts? I see you unmuted for a second.
Thinking.
Understandable.
And I think what Jim was trying to ask was, is it useful to have some sort of script or pre-composed software for the integration part, like the GitHub to Zenodo integration, to make it easier? Was that your question, Jim?
Yeah, more or less.
Okay.
And also, to gauge, is this something worth spending time on? Ms. Stewart evidently thinks not, and that's valid, but some of us might really want that capability. And yeah, and also if, as you mentioned, if we can maybe establish some best practices on how this stuff should be used. Like Nick in the comments in the chat mentioned that he's reluctant to use to store DOIs in PyProject.toml because there's no accepted PEP for doing that. And so we might be, implementing something that's going to be superseded by a future standard.
Right.
Go ahead.
I remembered. For using an API like Stuart suggested, if someone's on an airplane, then one possibility would be to have the API usage fail gracefully so that the documentation will still build, but or the DOI thing will show. But like let things work except for that very specific thing. And for Pleasant Pi, we don't use the Zenodo GitHub integration because of the DOI issue. And specifically want to make it as easy as possible for people to cite the software because that's not an established practice in most of our community. But we do have a script that it's not too long that updates the DOI in a couple of small places. Version number. Which isn't great, but it's adequate.
I agree with John's comment in the chat.
I mean, it is literally, it's bike shedding, but we're not talking about paint even. I mean, it's like it's incredibly frustrating. As Stuart says, it's a very, very small thing, but as Rebecca points out, it's also an important thing, and we're just kind of chasing our tail. Sorry, that's maybe a conversation for my therapist and not for this group, but I just share so much frustration with folks on this. This is something we should be able to do well.
What I want to hear is what structure would be good if you had the chance to burn it down and have something that was better. What would it look like? And I'm asking because just judging from the interest from all of these groups, Zenodo and GitHub included, there is interest in the next several months to a few years on improving this kind of thing. And there's coordination that's building up. So it would be great to have at least a sample from this group. Sample might be the wrong word. An idea. So what would this upstream fix look like? How would you want it to operate? What's wrong with the current picture that is providing the frustration now? Because it looks like we have a chance to make requests on what we want.
Well, the first thing is we should ask Zenodo for a feature request where you can reserve a DOI for a version and have the GitHub integration just use it.
Okay.
I mean, it seems Zenodo is open source, so there's, you can ask them for things or even do it you know. I've just done some searching through the Zenodo issue tracker, and there doesn't seem to be an issue for this. So we haven't even got that far.
Okay. What else?
Any immediate thoughts from all of your experience, Jim?
Yeah, it'd be great if we could get Zenodo to do this on their end. But yeah, just sort of absorbing the conversation that's happened so far. Don't really have anything to add at this point.
Well, are there things that could be done just based on what you were just presenting on? Is there something you think you've thought of that would make the process you were just working on easier?
Well, as Nick pointed out, there's not a standard for using DOIs in PyProject.toml. So maybe, I don't know, maybe it'd be worth trying to submit a PEP for this.
Okay. So is the PyProject.toml file used in the Zenodo GitHub integration?
No, I believe not. It's not specific to Python at all.
Okay. Yeah, Nick Murphy, the discussion is that we're planning to migrate from the citation.cff files, which has a lot of problems, to a codemeta.json file, which has much more flexibility and it's more straightforward as the, and even instead of the zenodo.json file, to have this file be the thing that's interoperable between Zenodo, GitHub, Google included, all of that stuff.
Yeah, we originally started with codemeta.json for Plasma Pi because I like it better.
Right.
But citation.cff had better tooling and GitHub interoperability, so that's why we switched over to citation.cff.
Right. Right. Any other feature, any other requests that we can propagate up the chain or maybe act on ourselves and get momentum behind? What would make this process easier?
In the meantime, if there's, so Stuart mentioned using the Zenodo API. If someone has like a minimal example of how to do that to get the DOI, maybe they could go into the PyHC template.
I was about to suggest that.
Oh, okay, cool.
Would you agree, Sean?
I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
No
I don't know,
worries.
I wasn't paying attention when I talked. Would it be useful to have an example of how to use the Zenodo API to get like the DOI in the PyHC package template?
Oh, it's already in there. Yeah. There is already a section in the README for using the Zenodo integration.
Does that include like getting the DOI so that it like appears in the documentation?
I'm not entirely sure. The steps I put in there are definitely simpler than what was demonstrated today. There was like basically a guide that Rebecca pointed me to on just doing it on the Zenodo side, like activating the toggles on the Zenodo website. And it could be distilled down into 5 points, like 5 steps, and then I linked to that guide for more assistance, but that's all that is in the README of the PyHC repo template at the moment.
So it sounds like some more material is being requested.
Yeah, I was certainly thinking the whole time I was watching Jim's presentation that a lot of this could be included somehow into that section of the PyHC repo template just to help people who go down similar paths.
And just in the chat, I don't know if you caught it, but there were links to SunPy solution for this and PlasmaPy solution for this. I don't know if anyone else has some scripts you want to throw links to in the chat to give Sean a good starting point. Maybe of solutions you've come up with, and of course what Jim just presented on.
And taking a step back, also, it's important to change the culture so that it's commonplace to cite the specific software that's being used. Because like it's been standard to cite a paper describing the software, but like not the software itself. So.
Well, a little care here. So it's still very important to cite that reference publication. But for reproducibility and for someone trying to see if your work makes sense in a given publication, they need to know the version of the software that you used. So that's the motivation to add that version specific citation to your citations in that publication. It's not, absolutely not, to replace that citation to your reference publication. It's supposed to be alongside.
Yeah, so that's like the way that at least SunPy and PlasmaPy do it. Or actually, we don't have a publication, but SunPy is doing awesome with this.
And we're live again. Do we need follow-up conversation or some time to iron out some of what we would want hear more? Or Rebecca, do you feel like you got the information you needed to carry you back upstream?
I have two things written down to carry upstream. This feature request have a version specific DOI, and then a standard for using DOIs in PyProject TOML. I haven't heard any ideas to simplify this GitHub Zenodo integration. I am interested in hearing those.
I
If
think
you
honestly, if it were possible for the integration to publish to a draft record instead of a final one,
okay,
that would make just something that makes it possible to to reserve that DOI, to fix it if it's broken, and not have to be perfect. And so maybe the ability to publish to a draft record is a first step in that, because then you can fix stuff up before you make it a live record.
Okay. Well, I think we've beaten this topic into the ground for the time being. Perhaps we shall move on to the next thing on the agenda, unless anyone has any remaining thoughts. We can always talk about this again later. I know everyone's really excited about DOI minting. Also, Jim, do you feel like you got the feedback you needed?
Yeah, it's nice to know that other people might find some use in this eventually. So good to know that my exploring the rabbit hole was not completely in vain, And I think I may continue working on this, try to flesh it out a little bit more. And then maybe when we have more clarity on standards and metadata formats and so forth, then we can think about polishing this up and making a real tool out of it.
Cool. Glad to hear it. Okay, well then I'll officially retire this topic for the time being, and we can move on with our lives. So up next on the agenda, we have some time to talk about FEP updates. And I know, John, you've been doing some work in that arena.
Yay, more dead horses. All right. I'm just throwing the slides link in there for folks who like to be able to click on links instead of looking at Zoom share and be horrified that doesn't work, but that also means I should probably share slides as well. All right, cool. So I'm gonna try to get that out of your way. I'm going to be talking about a lot of what other folks are doing here. So if I talk about something you're doing, please just yell, because again, Zoom has reduced everybody to a very tiny set of windows as soon as I started sharing. And yeah, there's no way I can fix that. So just giving quick updates on where we are in the FEP process. The FEP2 template was approved by the second vote in the fall meeting, and Sean did all the work to get that merged. Everything's on the website, so this is finally done. Stick a fork in it. So we're good there. FEP3, which is Sean's work on pulling in spec. Is it 0? I think it's 0. But on supporting previous versions of dependencies and such, passed the first vote in the fall meeting. That happened. I'm not sure if that was trumpeted as widely as it maybe should have. Sean, do you have any comments on this? Do you want to talk now or talk later?
Yeah, I agree that it probably wasn't trumpeted as loud as it should have been. And I considered pushing to get the other second vote to just finalize the thing into this spring meeting, but that just didn't end up happening. So might happen at the fall meeting, but I think everyone's pretty much in agreement on that FEP. I don't think there's really any updates that need to happen to it.
Well, if we passed already a vote at the previous fall meeting, that means the second one can happen at a telecon, right?
Yeah.
So we don't need to wait until the next meeting.
Yeah, that's true. I guess maybe in my mind, I was kind of leaving open the possibility that if something came up in FEP4 that kind of like pointed to we might want to update the package and Python versioning outlined in PEP3, that I might like save that as a possibility. But maybe after this conversation that we have today, I'll decide whether or not that's actually a thing.
That's a good point. All right, anything else on 3?
Nope, I don't think so. Other than actually, I can note that interestingly, even though it's not implemented as a rule right now, just following the activity in the PyHC environment, most packages are like just self-selecting to follow the rules that are outlined in Spec 0 and FEP3. I don't know if they're intending to update their Python versions at the right times and do all that stuff, but it's kind of happening organically, which is cool to see.
Nice. All right. Just know that's related to 3, which is it looks like what we're kind of coming into here, we've discussed it explicitly in a few places, but I don't think it's been adopted as policy per se, is that basically we're kind of moving towards rolling updates of our existing standards document, where as standards are getting updated, we're going to update the summary and reference the FEP in there. And we're discussing this because Sean basically started doing this with FEP3, which I think makes a lot of sense. So I just wanted to highlight that. And that will probably also then put a reference to FEP1 or the FEP page in general at the top of the standards document. So that's going to start to kind of evolve. And there's some discussion of that in the FEP3 PR and also, I think there's an issue open on that. So let me throw those links in the chat real quick just so people have them. That's the FEP3 PR. And then, again, a lot of this is kind of coming out of conversation leading up to the fall meeting, which was a pretty active time. So if nobody has any thoughts on that. All right, cool.
Well, maybe I'll just ask.
Yeah, sure.
John, did you agree when I commented that the DOI to the FEP is probably the best version of the document to point to when we're like linking to it in the standards doc?
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, so just to be clear about what's being said in these 3 slides, we have our standards document right now, and we're proposing just like as FEPs come along that kind of modify or enhance what's in the standards doc, we can just change the text in the standards doc and then include like C FEP number and then give a link to the DOI for it to motivate the change. And I kind of like that approach.
And that keeps the standards document as a little bit more of the teal deer of the FEPs.
Yep.
All right.
Feels like less work for us too, so I'm a fan.
Okay, FEP4 package tiering. We talked a lot at the fall meeting. I think Julie has a lot of actions from there, which she has been dealing with in her copious spare time. And one of the things that was kind of open on that was that it was using tabular information, which is not strict common mark, which again is getting into bike shedding of the highest order. So I just threw a comment in the PR of maybe what we need to do if there's something where process isn't working for us, we just call out, hey, look, this is what we said we were doing in FEP1, but in this case, we're doing something different, and this is the reason why. And since we're all voting on this anyhow, we can vote to break our own rules if we have to.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you put some good suggestions on that PRIC of what text to put in there to say how and why we're doing that.
I'm not sure good, but suggestions.
Well, it's better than doing it and saying nothing, I figure.
Yeah.
But as for updates on that, so a lot of what was discussed in the fall meeting essentially was ripping out specifics from FEP4 itself and doing a lot of pointing to these upcoming standards track FEPs. So I did those modifications. Gosh, I think there were a couple other suggestions as well that I incorporated in that I'm blanking on at the moment, but I encourage you, and I'll put the link here in the chat to go look at FEP4 and see what all's been updated. And please give your comments and suggestions. This has been in existence for a hot second now. It'd be great to get to some sort of state convergence where we could vote on it at a telecon or something. That's what I have to say on that for right now.
Oh gosh, I had somehow managed to miss that you pushed commits back in April. Sorry.
No worries. That points back to the copious spare time. When was our fall meeting again?
All right. Seeing no hands or unmutes, then plunging onward. Other things, Nabil did all that work on this AstroPi time FEP, and Julie and I were talking and realized, wait a minute, we have this process for like capturing withdrawn FEPs and making sure we capture the conversation and like get them DOIs and make sure they don't just disappear over the horizon. So I checked in with Nabil, and he's done with this. So I will try to do some spade work just to bring things to the point where it looks like we've got the discussion captured in there, and it can be formally minted as a DOI, put up on Zenodo, have it withdrawn, but capture kind of the state of the conversation at that point, so that if people are interested in coming back to this concept, we've got a starting point. But if somebody else wants to volunteer to do that, I'm happy to hand that off. And again, I'm not seeing a lot of hands go up. Okay. Then the other thing, which I opened all of, I don't know, 20 hours ago. Uh, we had discussed this at the fall meeting, kind of this category of the existing standards that was talking about communities, so that's stuff like code of conduct and contributor guides and that sort of thing, and licensing, where we got really, really hung up on GPL and NOSA specifically, and just not because we were going in circles, but literally because it was a very hard problem. So the consensus at the meeting is that most of the community standards were pretty much good to go. And so those are all basically just in the FEP, copy paste, boom, this is what they are. The licensing thing, I think I'd rather leave people to look at the actual wording. But the idea is to make things an essay writing assignment, which is if you're doing something other than a strongly recommended license, you've got to have a pretty good explanation both for why and how you're going to deal with the problems of that. Wordsmithing on that would be really appreciated. Also, I wrote it to be awfully prescriptive because I think one of the things that we had come out of that conversation was that we really, really want new people to be able to come and have a very clear guidance. So what it says right now is if you're looking for a license, you do 3-clause BSD or Apache. And that was based on my potentially faulty memory that I think Apache is the other one that NASA's okay with. It might be MIT. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And if you're doing anything other than that, then at Gold, you kind of need to explain why. And the amount you need to explain is not very much if you're doing 2-clause BSD, like SunPy. But you better explain yourself really well if you're stuck using NOSA. Yay, okay, good, I got it right, it's Apache. So please do look at that. It is a very specific and very concrete proposal for the sake of having something to throw rocks at, not because that's the way it has to be. I'd love to get that. Other than that, all of the community stuff, there's a big chunk of best practices, which is kind of all of the things that people have suggested as good ideas. And there's also a chunk of reference implementations, which is just calling out primarily Plasma Pi and SunPy. I would love to see other examples of things done well with regards to this. So please, please, please throw stuff in there. Please self-nominate if there's something your package you think does pretty well in this category. Please throw it in there. And then I think that's, oh yeah. Then just again from the fall meeting, we had a couple other broad categories where primarily we're pretty happy with our hard requirements. And so this will be very similar to the community things of we're going to take the existing requirements, we're going to say, yes, we are still doing these, and then lots of standards and resources and such. So I should actually, well, I've linked this, but I will go ahead and link the PR as well separately for the community and licensing. So please do take a look at that. And then I will try to, I'd like to see a little bit how that falls out if that approach seems to work for people. And then I will start doing this with the other standards where I'll do the same thing. I'll throw some text down and I'll be asking for examples of best practices. So that is my set of updates. Not a lot been, sorry, I've not been able to do as much writing on that as I'd like. Go IMAP. So.
No, that's totally fair. I'm wondering with these things if some kind of, God, don't throw too many tomatoes, self-imposed deadline would help get the ideas flowing from people faster and get these pushed through a bit faster than waiting until the next biannual meeting.
Yeah, I can start throwing some timelines on these just so people have some feeling of how to go. Uh-oh. Okay, now I'm wondering if the chat is anything that matters or not. If that's inside baseball.
Rebecca just said caution flag.
People are generally stressed out right now. Let's not make it worse. That's the caution flag.
Okay. Well, let's not say deadlines. Let's say proposed timeline. How's that?
Beautiful.
When I say deadline, I allow us to violate our deadline on this.
Deadline's a bad word right now.
So I guess so. Let me throw this open. It would be nice to have the fall meeting be a point of some progress on all of this stuff. Whether that, so I can ask, do we want to say we want the fall meeting to be the first vote on this stuff, or we hope to get to the point where the fall meeting can be the final approval for this?
Yeah, that's fair.
That's an either or.
I personally prefer the second, just to get the ball rolling. But what's the thoughts from the crew here? Feel free to just unmute. Maybe other package developers that would want to say on this. Nick, Jim, Stuart, Ashley.
And maybe we say again, what are the two options being debated here?
So either I can say, let's try to get these in a position such that we can have a first vote over the summer, right, or early fall, such that we can have the second vote and approval at the fall meeting. Or say, you know, we usually have good discussion at the first vote at the meeting, so we shoot for having the first vote at the fall meeting. And then the second vote would be, you know, later in the fall. I will say we had a lot of discussion about this last fall, and it did seem like the answer was to largely stay the course, and so maybe we won't need to have as much discussion. So as a default, I could lay out something that would bring us towards a first vote early September, with then a second vote at the fall meeting being sometime October, November usually.
I personally like that timeline better than trying to get the first vote done in the summer.
Well, that would be getting they'll be getting the first vote done before the fall meeting, but still not over the summer. So
yeah, I guess sorry,
that feels
September in my
realistic.
mind isn't summer anymore. Maybe it still is technically by the dates.
Until almost the end, it's summer, technically. How does everyone feel about that? I beg feedback.
Late summer sounds good to me.
Sure.
Yay. All right. There's been some consensus of approval. We'll hold you to the self-imposed timeline.
Okay, I will throw some timelines on. Yeah, before fiscal 26. Yeah. Yep.
Cries and laughs. I'll just throw FEP 4 votes into the same timeline. So do please take a look at what's changed. And if I didn't quite capture the spirit of what we were hoping for at the last fall meeting, I really want to know so I can update that and get it done. Okay, cool. Well, I think this topic is generally talked out. So the last discussion focused part of the spring meeting, I just wanted to get our eyes back on, and I just put it in the chat, the link, the PyHC user survey, and maybe concurrently real-time resolve some of these comments so that we can send this out to folks. I don't know, Nick, if you had any overall things to say about this. I know I didn't previously ask you about doing that, so.
I managed to find the slide deck, which I put in the chat for December. I'm going to try to share, and hopefully this doesn't cause me to crash. Am I still here? Yes. Okay. Cool. So we had some discussions late last year about having a user survey for specific users of PyHC packages across the Helio Pythoniverse. And there are a lot of reasons for doing this. So figuring out what functionality the community still needs, and then prioritizing it, figuring out the roadblocks that prevent different packages from being used together, which we have our own opinions about from the summer school, but it's really useful to get the users' opinions about that also. And then figure out like what reasons people don't want or are preventing people from contributing to PyHC packages. Like, is it not knowing Git and GitHub? Is the process too confusing? All sorts of things like that. And then overall to better understand the PyHC user community. So that's like the overall picture. And I think this is the Google Doc that Julie shared. And
Just quick question, Nick. I'm seeing your home screen. Should we be seeing slides or something of the like?
yes, artworks.
Luckily, what you've been talking about was pretty self-explanatory, so it hasn't been an issue until this moment.
Okay. Not the first time this happened. There. Okay. So slides. Yeah, I just updated my operating system kind of recently, and Zoom has been weird. So yeah, like figuring out what needs the PyHC community has and like how we can respond to them, how we can improve the environment. And so this is the long-awaited, eagerly anticipated Google Doc, link in the chat, that has our brainstorm from December. And so overall, the questions are there people who are willing and have the capacity to work on this sometime in the next few months before like the fall meeting? The funding for Plasma Pi is running out very soon, so I'm not likely to be able to. But yeah, so are there people who are willing to?
What is left to be done?
I think to create the survey, to figure out like distill the brainstorm down and put it into like actual questions and do that. And then advertising it, and it'll probably be like more effort than we think it will to distill the results from the survey.
This definitely feels like something I want to be involved with.
Same, yeah. Would love some other outside input. I know, Nick, you're in a precarious funding situation, as are many people. Self-imposed break. But if we could get some kind of the package input in this to make sure that we're asking the kind of questions that's actually helpful for you all, that'd be great too. I know everyone's got vast copious amounts of free time. It could maybe be Sean and I workshopping it and then just asking for review even.
What if we just have the next telecon slot? Telecons are every other week, right? We're supposed to be?
In theory, schedule and holiday depending.
Right. So what if we just take the next telecon and shift it into a working session and whoever wants to help shows up? I imagine we can distill these into questions reasonably in an hour.
Sure.
And then it's a matter of copy and paste into a survey and try to include in whatever conferences or email chains that we're familiar with and go from there. I really think the bulk of the work is done here with the brainstorming and the discussions. It's just pulling it down into simple questions.
Yeah, we can do that. Did you want to then push off telecon time to talk through those vocabulary working sessions for the HSSI?
We'll prioritize later. I don't know if this would be the next telecon or a later one.
Sure.
But something coming up soon. Like for this work, we're not beating on a deadline door for it. It's more of a flexible thing. So sometime in the coming months, right? I'm thinking coming 2 or 3 months, something like that. We just take a telecon slot and draft some questions, or maybe we draft some questions before and then shoot at them. Something like that.
Yeah, maybe the latter.
Okay.
Okay, I'm happy with that solution. Oh, thanks. Is that Rebecca or Nick typing?
That's me typing. It's okay.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, cool. Well, no need to belabor the topic. Thanks, Nick, for helping me resurrect this.
Yeah,
Cool.
it's should be really important. We might want to also add an extra step for having a few people try out taking the survey before we send it out en masse, because they might like figure out, oh, this question is pretty awkward.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, we can look into that. Maybe some users that aren't here or normally on the fall meeting or biannual meeting. Telecons. Cool. Well, I don't have honestly this time around a whole lot to say for the wrap up other than thank you everyone who presented, who led tutorials and discussions and put a lot of work into making this meeting happen. I know it was meant to be in person. It would have been great to see your all's faces, but gestures around at the general political situation, I know that was difficult to make happen. So I'm glad we at least got to have this virtual component for everyone to gather on. I think the next one is likely to be all virtual as well, just because, funding permitting. There's Dash, there's AGU. If you're going to the USRSE meeting, that's also in October. It's just a really busy meeting time for people. And so we previously agreed to keep that virtual. So I'd like to honor that, even though this spring we kind of had to shift. I don't want a meeting overload people with travel and such. Although I know virtual meetings obviously still take some time to plan for, and presentations are presentations. So that's what I have to say about that. We already have a couple telecon ideas coming up, looking at this user survey, revisiting those HSSI vocabulary working sessions that we only had about 10 minutes yesterday to address, which just simply was not enough. But if you have other things that you really want to have discussed at upcoming telecons, you can always just DM me or let me know. Happy to assist with that. Let's see. Sometime mid this month, AGU is supposedly supposed to tell you if your session proposals were accepted. Knock on wood, PyHC has always had at least a poster session, so I imagine we'll have something like that again coming up in the fall. And I'll let the community know when and if it's accepted, and then deadlines for getting your abstracts in. Would love to have all of our projects have something there if you're able to make it. And that's all I have for right now. Sean, as the tech lead, do you have anything to wrap up to say?
Nope. I'll just echo your thanks to everybody, and it was a pleasure.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again, and I will see you all again at the next telecon. Not likely this coming Monday, but the one after. We'll go ahead and start it. I'll figure out which of the topics we should throw in there. Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.